Hey guys, welcome to my full review for the Huawei Nexus 6P. This is the bigger brother to the 5X, which is the other offering from LG and Google, and I've been using this for around a week as my daily driver, and I've got to say, I've enjoyed it immensely. Now, I am a fan of Nexus devices in general due to that sleek and fast stock Android experience, but in my opinion, this device really looks to step up the game, and let's not forget this is the first time a Chinese manufacturer has been given the responsibility of creating a Nexus device, and yet this is treading new ground in a lot of different ways, and we weren't quite sure what we'd get at the end of it, but nonetheless, let's get into it. So firstly, we can't not mention that quite eye-catching visor at the top of the phone. When the leaks of this first came out, the general consensus was that this was downright ugly, but after seeing it more and more, it honestly grew on me, so much so that I actually changed my order from the graphite to the aluminium as I wanted more of a contrast between the colours. The aluminium version, by the way, is great at not picking up fingerprints if that's something that gets on your nerves. The all-metal build here feels fantastic in the hand. When you pick it up off a table, it gives you that cold metal feel, and it just feels like a very expensive phone, up there with the likes of the iPhone and other metal build devices. A lot was made of the camera hump as well, but quite honestly, it's so small it's not even noticeable. It still lays flat on a table, so it's a complete non-issue. The power button has a hatched rough feel, which is noticeably different to the smooth volume rocker, which helps distinguish between them. Looking at the front here, we have stereo front-facing speakers, which are actually set into the device, so you won't feel a bump when running your finger across them. The bezel size is a little bit bigger than what we had on the previous Nexus 6, but the screen to bezel ratio is still good in my opinion. And at the bottom we have the all-new USB Type-C port. Now, the feel in the hand, I really can't state this enough, but every time I pick it up, I'm impressed. It feels like a very expensive premium phone. I love that cold metal feel, and it's just easy to hold in one hand for me. Now, if I bring over my Nexus 6, which don't forget does have a bigger screen, so that does account for its extra size and weight, but I've got to say the 6P is a lot easier to hold, and it is lighter. It comes in at 178 grams compared to the Nexus 6's 184. But what really makes the difference here is the narrowness of the device. So if I put these together, basically you'll see that the Nexus 6 is quite a bit wider than the 6P, and honestly that makes quite a big difference when holding this with one hand. On paper the 6P is ever so slightly taller, but in real life you really can't see any difference. The biggest thing here is the narrowness really helps hold it with one hand. We have a 5.7-inch AMOLED display with a QHD resolution which equals a PPI of 518. It's also using the newest Corning Gorilla Glass 4 for protection, so it should be even more resilient to scratches than the previous generation. Out of the box you get very punchy, vibrant colours that AMOLED panels are known for. The display is super crisp. You're not going to see any pixels no matter how close you look. Text on any background looks pretty fantastic. It all looks very clear, very sharp. It's an excellent display for clarity. And yes, having an AMOLED display means the black levels are just off the charts. You get those inky deep blacks that really do look fantastic and are especially good to help with reading in low light situations as well. So yeah, it's just an excellent display overall. Now, if you're someone that wants a more accurate display, Google included an sRGB mode in the developer settings that drastically changes the color output of the display, and it does make a big difference. If you're used to the default colors, it's going to look a lot more muted, but it's a great mode to check out pictures. I was looking through my gallery here and everything just looked a little bit more realistic. The colors didn't look quite as vibrant, but they looked more lifelike, so it's a great mode to view pictures. In terms of the brightness, it's not the brightest display in the world. It's not going to reach the levels of the Note 5 or anything, but you can see this is outdoor. I didn't have a sunny day to test, but basically you're going to have to crank the brightness pretty high up on the slider to actually view it in outdoor light, but I could see this fine. It was no issues for me, so yeah, it is viewable in outdoor light, but it's not the brightest display in the world. One of the newest additions to the Nexus line is the fingerprint scanner. It's called Nexus Imprint. You can see it on the back there above the Nexus logo, and it's placed on the back so you can simply move your index finger to the sensor and it'll unlock your device. And with a phone that's this big, I think having the fingerprint sensor on the back makes sense. If you have it on the front, you have to do some weird grip and you'll probably drop your phone. So I'm pretty happy with the placement, and the setup process is an absolute breeze to use. It's the quickest setup process I've used. It takes about 6 or 7 presses of your finger to the scanner, and that's it. It doesn't take 20 or 30 like some other scanners do. Now, this sensor is seriously quick and accurate. All you have to do is bring your finger up to the sensor and boom, you're into your home screen. When the device recognizes the fingerprint, it will give a small vibration. If it doesn't recognize it, it will vibrate twice to let you know. Accuracy has been phenomenal for me. Its speed and transparency makes it a breeze to use. Performance on this device is fantastic. It has a 64-bit Snapdragon 810 under the hood and 3GB of DDR4 RAM, which is the faster variant, and it's handled everything I've thrown at it, including games. The camera app is super speedy to open, websites load very quickly and noticeably quicker than my Nexus 6 actually. And RAM management is also top notch. I've been back to an app that I haven't used in over a day and it was still waiting for me from where I left it. I was actually a little bit confused, but it just shows you how well it can keep apps in memory. And I actually noticed that I hadn't restarted my device in 3 or 4 days and the performance is still this snappy, so there's no degrading in performance over time, which is nice to see. But just check out this speed in multitasking, it's exceptionally fast. My device is encrypted, you can see the read and write speeds right here. There's nothing to worry about. Encryption is very quick on this device. It's not going to slow down your memory performance by a significant margin. I've got a few benchmark numbers coming up for you if that's your thing, but in terms of heat production, the device did get warm just above the fingerprint scanner when playing games or long periods of web browsing, but in my opinion it was only ever warm, never hot, or worryingly hot, and I never noticed any degrading of performance. Now, Google made a big fuss about the camera, and Nexus devices generally have had pretty poor cameras. The Nexus 6 was a decent camera, but nothing special. Now, the 6P is using much larger pixels to help bring in more light, but it also has a sensor size that's equal to a point-and-shoot camera. You can see right at the bottom there, it's the same size as the Z5, but bigger than pretty much everything else, so very impressive for Google to include this sensor. Now, in terms of the camera app, that's also had some improvements. Firstly, you can access it by double tapping the power button, so it's a nice little gesture to quickly access the camera. You could just see how quick that was. It was seriously fast to load in. You do have an auto HDR plus mode, which is basically what I leave it on most of the time. It'll decide if it thinks it needs auto HDR, which is pretty nice. Swipe right, you get to the camera. It does have 120 and 240 frames per second slow-mo, which is just awesome to see. You can have a lot of fun with slow-mo. I do have a video a little bit later to show you as well. In terms of features, there aren't too many to talk about. You have lens blur and photosphere in the menu, but you don't have any manual controls, which is a shame to see. I'd love to see Google add manual controls eventually because I'd love to mess with ISO levels and white balance from time to time. Unfortunately, there is no optical image stabilization here, but you do have software stabilization, which you can see has an option right in the settings there. But the camera app itself is much improved in my opinion. You can just see it reacts instantly to pressing the shutter to when it takes the shot, and it also has a burst mode, which is very quick at taking photos. Now, the actual image quality I've been seriously impressed with, and what I've been most impressed with is just how easy it is to use this camera, and I really can't state that enough. On previous Nexus devices, sometimes you'd have to take the shot 2 or 3 times to get a decent one, but all these shots you're seeing right now are first time shots. I didn't have to retake any of them. The focus was quick. You also get that natural bokeh effect due to that f/2.0 aperture lens, which is cool. And low light shots, again, I've been very impressed with. Due to that larger pixel size, it can bring in more light and it just brings a pretty awesome shot at night. I've seen some people take some images that just look fantastic in a city. In terms of video recording, it has some excellent quality, but you can see sometimes it's a little bit shaky, and that's due to the omission of optical image stabilization. The software stabilization does a decent job, and maybe they can tweak that in upcoming updates, but it's not quite as good as having optical image stabilization, so you do need quite a steady hand to keep it still. But nonetheless, the actual clarity, the image quality, and the color reproduction is pretty fantastic. Slow motion videos are a lot of fun. I've seen loads of awesome examples online. Here is one of a hot tub starting up. Just be aware that if you're using the 240 frames per second, the resolution does drop to 720p, and due to the shutter speed, you are going to need a lot of light for these videos to come out in good quality. So if you try and do these in low light or indoor with pretty poor lighting, you're not going to be too impressed with the quality. Make sure you've got a lot of light for this. The 6P has a pretty large 3450 mAh battery. The USB-C port does support fast charging, but it's not Qualcomm's variant, so you can't use Qualcomm's fast chargers with this, but it charges from empty to full in about an hour and 20 minutes. I've been getting some pretty great battery life with this, especially standby time. Now, Marshmallow comes with doze and you can pretty much pinpoint where doze has actually kicked in, but you can see I was off the charger for over a day, probably a day and 10 hours, and I got 3 hours 13 minutes screen on time with about 29% left. That's pretty great in my book. This device really doesn't lose a lot of juice when it's in standby, which is nice to see. On this test, again, I had over a day and 10 hours off the charger. I still had 25% left when I plugged it in, but in terms of screen on time, I had over 4 hours. So again, this is pretty impressive to me, especially considering it's over 24 hours off the charger and still 4 hours screen on time. So very impressive battery life in my book. The Nexus 6P here pretty much ticks all the boxes in my opinion. I think it's an exceptional phone, pretty much the best Android experience you can buy right now, especially if you're a fan of stock Android. It seriously impressed me. The camera especially, I think the camera can go toe to toe with the Galaxy S6, the iPhone 6s, all those top end phones. This camera can go toe to toe with, and that's something we could never say about Nexus devices before. So there you go guys, I've been seriously impressed with the Nexus 6P, and I really hope the Nexus line can keep up this standard, because the 6P is a real step up from the devices we had before. It just really is the full package. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Peace out.